Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. Hello. It's great to see everybody's faces. As you guys are setting up your audio and getting comfortable, hopefully you have your cup of coffee. Can you see my cup? Not really. Um, I'm so excited for today. Please introduce yourself in the chat just so we can have a feel for who's here today and what nonprofit you're from. This is our first official webinar of the 2025 season at Colorado Gives Foundation. So I'm really excited for everybody to be here today. We have a big group, so please keep yourself on mute. We will be actively monitoring chat. All right. We'll wait just a minute or two more as we have some folks joining, and then we'll get started. And while you guys are logging in, feel free to introduce yourself into chat. All right, hot topic today. Everybody was raring to go, wanted to talk about endowments. Well, this is the place to be today. All right, I'm going to keep letting people in. I think we'll go ahead and start the webinar. So again, welcome. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. And let's go ahead and jump in. So today we are talking about future-proofing your nonprofit. So in these times of uncertainty, how can you generate revenue streams that are sustainable and reliable? So it's the power and perks of endowments. All right. So good morning. Today we're joined by Tim Zesker, who is our endowment manager. Say hi, Tim. And my name
There.
is Jordan Brown. I'm the Nonprofit Success Manager. We're going to be leading your webinar today and managing the chat in Zoom. We'll also have time for questions at the end. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide.
Oh,
So some webinar housekeeping for today. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded, and the slide deck and the recorded webinar will be sent to you post-webinar. And just a recording disclaimer, any of the numbers that we're showing here that might relate to donation or donor information is for demonstration purposes only and is fictionalized. All right, let's talk about the agenda. So of course, we'll introduce ourselves, Colorado Gives Foundation, and how we work with endowments. And then we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into what an endowment is and what it could mean for your nonprofit. We'll of course talk about myths, benefits, and some roadblocks that people encounter as they're trying to set up their endowments. And then we're going to back off of the serious content and take a quiz, a self-assessment to see if your nonprofit is ready for an endowment. And then I'll jump in here at the end and talk a little bit about the importance of digital fundraising and how people are raising funds for endowments on Colorado Gives. After that, we'll have time for some Q&A, so I'm really excited to get started. All right, with that, I'll hand it over to Tim. Thank you so much for today in advance, and let's talk about Colorado Gives Foundation for a sec.
thanks so much, Jordan. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to be with you all. Quick story about Jordan. Jordan and I started the same week at here at Colorado Gives Foundation, a little over 2 years ago. And there aren't that many people on staff here, right? We have, I think, about 30 people on staff now. And it's very humbling to be the second best person hired in a given week at your small foundation. So Jordan is fantastic. It's been a wonderful honor to be her colleague, and she does such a great job with these. So I don't mind having the silver medal behind Jordan for being hired that same week as she is. But also huge thanks to all of you for being here. I got through the first like 5 or 6 people in the chat and gave some thumbs up, and then realized there's just a lot of great nonprofits and a lot of great organizations that are here. So thank you for your time. It's wherever you are meeting us, we welcome you there. I know there's a lot going on. There's a little bit of uncertainty going on in some of the nonprofit world. And so I know that we're weighing that, but also hopefully seeing some great opportunities in front of us, like endowments. And yesterday was 70 degrees in Denver, so I'm not sure where you are around the state, but there's some good things to look forward to. If you're on spring break, thank you for joining us. If you're on spring break next week, have a great time. My kids go on spring break next week. And I'll share one more bit of optimism. I'm a little optimistic that Colorado Avalanche captain Gabriel Landeskog might be coming back sometime soon. I don't know. I have no insider knowledge on the Avalanche. Maybe a little on endowments, so I'll stick to what I know. Colorado Gives Foundation. There are two ways that we really invest back into the community and into the state. We are a nonprofit that serves Jefferson County. We invest about $9 million into community impact grants in Jefferson County each year. We also are a community foundation for the entire state of Colorado. Obviously, Jordan and her team, they do some great work around Colorado Gives Day and through coloradogives.org and can support nonprofits all over the state in that way. We also invest donor advised funds, endowments, and a number of other tools that can help make giving easy. So our mission is to connect people, ideas, and nonprofits to make good happen. We do that in Jeffco, and of course, we do that around the state. So if you have any questions just about what we do beyond endowments, which we'll talk about plenty of today, let us know. Throw them in the chat. Jordan will look at those, and I'm happy to answer them when I turn it back over to her. So especially endowments is what we're going to talk about today. We have over 130 different nonprofit organizations across the state who invest their endowment with us. And you might be saying, that's really cool, or you might be saying, Tim, I have no idea what that means. That's why I'm here today. 130 different nonprofits invest their endowments with us. Most of those are permanent funds that they have with us that each year we send a distribution back to them. We help support endowments in three ways, and we'll talk all about this in just a second. We help grow them through investments, through providing you all with philanthropic and fundraising tools, and also through grant funding when organizations start endowments. So we'll talk about all of those in a little bit. Here's the one big thing that kind of sets us apart. As I mentioned, as a community foundation, invest dollars back into the community. One of the ways that we choose to do that is investing money back into the coloradogives.org platform and Colorado Gives Day. We invest a lot of dollars there. We invest a lot of dollars into community impact grants. But then another way that we've decided to do that is to put dollars towards helping organizations grow their endowments. So when an organization starts an endowment with Colorado Gives Foundation, we do a 10% matching grant. So if an organization says, guess what, I want to move $1 million, I'm going to use fund numbers. Don't feel bad if you say, we don't have $1 million. But if you say, hey, we want to open a fund for $1 million at Colorado Gives Foundation, we'll say, congratulations. You now have an endowment worth $1.1 million because we've put $100,000 of our own grant dollars into your fund. So that's really neat. We also have some other opportunities as organizations grow those funds to add matching grants as well. People ask all the time, how do you do this? Why do you do this? Well, again, a lot of the grant dollars that we give out are for immediate impact. The money you're raising on Colorado Gives Day or work that organizations maybe are doing in Jeffco. But this is our solution to help make immediate but also long-term impact, because we want you to succeed not just today, but in the future as well. Okay, so it might seem a little odd. We started there, and now we're going to go back to what is an endowment? So a nonprofit endowment is a long-term fund invested for both current and future needs of an organization. I am not a slide reader typically, but I'm going to read this one. It is designed to provide a reliable source of income for a nonprofit's charitable mission for generations to come. Endowments are typically structured to be held in perpetuity. That means forever. They're set up to actually continue to grow forever, and only a portion of the earnings generated come back to the nonprofit each year. So ensuring that it continues its sustainability. So I think to give a good example, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, to give a good example, an organization might say, we have $100,000 and we're wondering what to do with this. One option could be, well, we want to invest this $100,000 into programs or into a building. I don't know what part of the state you're in where you could afford a building for $100,000, but let's just say you can. So $100,000, say I want to invest it in programs or a building or something like that. That could be very, very, very important for you to do. And I know so many of you do such good work on the ground that $100,000 could go a long way. The benefits to that would be that you're serving a lot of people immediately. The downside is that once the money is spent, it's gone, and then you have to wonder, well, how are we going to keep up these programs or the new building or whatever that might be? So the other end of the spectrum is using that $100,000 to build an endowment, and then every year you would receive a distribution from that. So the first year you would receive a $4,000 distribution. The next year would probably be a little bit higher than that. Next year would be a little bit higher than that. And yet that $100,000 always continues to be there. This is how an organization, schools like Harvard University, I don't know enough about Harvard, but I do know that they have a 50 billion with a B, $50 billion endowment, meaning that they spin off about $2 billion every year without dipping into any savings or anything like that. Obviously, that is an exception, not the norm for most of us, but that's how an endowment typically works, is that the money continues to grow, and yet you receive a reliable income stream year over year. So we'll talk a little bit about this in a second. Gifts to fund the endowment, where it comes from is from the organization, and that is the seed to start an endowment. Then it grows over time and through earnings and through investments, and then each year money comes back to you. So the plant analogy is kind of a good one. You plant the seed, we help you grow the fund, and then we help make the distributions. What makes us unique, though, as I mentioned earlier, is the yellow arrow can kind of represent the seed. That comes from the nonprofit. The green, a number of organizations like us can help you grow endowments through investments. But what really makes us unique is that we also would do that through offering philanthropic advice and coaching and consulting and tools and resources, and we'll talk about that later. But also that 10% matching grant is a pretty unique one as well. And then the money comes back to you each year. So why does this matter? You might say, Tim, in your analogy, if I had $100,000, I'm just going to invest them in programs. And my response to that would be, your organization better than I do, and we're going to help you ask the right questions, but you know your organization better than we do, and we very much trust how you would use your resources. I also would point you to a quote by Brian Klontz, who is really an expert in planned giving and all things philanthropy. He's a national expert that we've partnered with a couple of times. Brian said, by 2035, your goal as a nonprofit should be to have 20% of your operating budget coming from endowments. And I first heard him say that, and I was like, okay, that's cool. But then I started to think about that, and it started to scare me. Brian gives a little bit of logic on why, which we'll talk about in just a second. But 20% of an operating budget coming from an endowment, that means if you have $1 million operating budget, everything you do costs $1 million, then 20% of that, $200,000. That means that by 2035, Brian is hoping that you would have an endowment of $5 million. That really scares me because I just don't know a lot of organizations other than Harvard University and maybe some of the other big universities and maybe other foundations and things like that that really are in that position. But I think for a couple reasons, he's really encouraging this. Reason number one, each year there are somewhere between 50 and 75,000 new nonprofits in the United States that begin operation. If you Google this right now, it'll tell you actually it's 100,000. But Brian actually estimates it a little bit closer to 50 to 75,000 because he said some of those never become functional. But nevertheless, 50 to 75,000 new nonprofits in the United States every single year. Just competition in the nonprofit space. Second is we're hearing about this great wealth transfer right now, and that's a great opportunity that we're going to talk about in a second. But also that means that that donor demographics in the next 10 years will change. I worked for an organization for a number of years, and we studied our donor demographics, and we saw we have a lot of 70, 80-year-old donors. Sadly, many of them might not be around in 2035. And so we would be really nervous. What happens when Sally no longer gives us $20,000 every single year because she's gone? Like, that is a big deal for a nonprofit of certain sizes. Well, if Sally writes you in her will or estate plan to set up an endowment for $500,000, then she will be giving you $20,000 forever, even when she's gone. That's kind of why Brian suggests that 20% of your operating budget should come from endowments. And I'm already kind of using some planned giving language. We're going to come back to this in a second. But there's also a lot of studies just about how different different generations of donors express generosity in different ways. A lot of the silent generation and boomer generation are much more loyal to certain nonprofits. It's expressed a little bit differently in Gen X and certainly millennials. And so if you have some loyal donors that are maybe a part of those older couple of generations, this is especially rings true for you. That's why endowments, what they are and why they are important. Jordan, before we transition on, I guess, are there any big questions in the chat that we should address now on just what they are? When we talk about the myths of endowments, maybe that would also address some of those, but I'll defer to you. What do you think? Should we take a question or two or keep rolling?
Yeah, I think we're good. Go ahead
Okay.
and keep rolling, and we'll pause a little bit later and see if anybody has some questions in the chat. Thanks.
Love it. Here are a few endowment myths. Only large organizations can afford to have endowments. Right? I just mentioned Harvard University is a $50 billion endowment. That's by far the biggest. I did not look before this, and I should have, but I think another Ivy League school like Yale or Princeton is second, and they're a distant second. So only large ones. From our experience, like I said, we have 130 nonprofit endowment partners. About 10, 12 of them or so are organizations that have reach across the state and maybe into other states, and they have hundreds of people on their staff. They're absolutely large organizations. We also have a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, that are completely volunteer-run organizations. The typical nonprofit endowment staff size, or at least a development size, is about 1.5 development people. So I came from one that was a little bit bigger, and I thought every endowment partner that Colorado Gives Foundation has to be bigger. But no, that's absolutely not the case. There's a lot of ways and a lot of reasons why organizations from of all sizes would explore endowments. Number 2, endowments will make donors and other funders realize that we don't need their contributions. So if you have an endowment, well, you always have this safety net. You always can have this money available. Then donors might not think that they really need to give. This is also what we find from empirically with data we've looked at, not true. One, uh, endowments are not really designed as a safety net. They're actually designed as the opposite. They're actually designed more as something that can continue to give you revenue year over year, predictable revenue, not necessarily a safety net. The second piece of this is actually what we'll look at when we look at planned giving, especially, is that donors like endowments. A lot of them like perpetuity options. I absolutely remember talking to a couple donors who had kind of the misconception of what the endowment was. They said, well, I don't know if you really need our money. But when they understood what it was, it actually became a really intriguing option for them to say, maybe I should write that into my will because, well, we're going to go into that in a minute. Also, I will say, I've talked with our community impact team here at the Colorado Gives Foundation, and they very much love to see nonprofits who have well thought through investments, from some cash reserves to a lot of money going into programs to also something like an endowment. Because again, funders, grant funders, like to support organizations that are making an impact now, but also have a vision and a plan to make an impact decades to come. Last one, endowments lock us into one program, limit our creativity and agility as an organization. I will share a horror story about this and then tell you why this is not actually the case very often at Colorado Gives Foundation. I'm borrowing this again from Brian Klontz. Brian tells a story about a church actually that has had a large endowment because a woman wrote the church into her will. Unfortunately, they set up an endowment because the will stipulated that the church was to use all of the money to buy flowers. The endowment grew so much, and it was such a big gift to start, that the church has something like over $500,000 in a flower budget every single year, and yet they have other operating and capital needs that they can't pay for. Yes, from time to time, a donor will want to set up an endowment that is specific to one thing. But that's not very common. More than half of our endowments are actually just for general operating. The purpose statement writes, to support the mission of your nonprofit. That's one thing. Two, one of the things the Colorado Gives Foundation does is even helps you as the nonprofit communicate with that donor on, hey, what are some of the real needs, so that we have both the resources to succeed now, but also the flexibility to continue the work that we do in whatever form that is later. So we do hear horror stories from time to time when endowments are not set up well, or someone writes you into their will for a very specific reason that might limit some creativity. There's a lot of ways that we work very much around that to make sure that endowments are working for you, not prohibiting your vision.
Hey, Tim, I was wrong. There's some great questions in the
Oh,
chat.
great.
Is this a good time?
Let's do it.
Okay. So this is awesome. Thank you guys for writing in. So Jessica wonders about the different places that funds or endowments are held. So obviously community foundations, we are a community foundation. Are there other places where endowments are held?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. Sure. I know organizations who, well, let me also back up. And I am not a firm stickler um, on some of my definitions. So some people will say, Tim, a true endowment is really when a donor sets up this fund with one specific purpose for one specific org. I'm not a true stickler on some of my definitions. Instead, what we're mainly talking about, permanent endowments that are designed, again, to be held in perpetuity. And so that just a percentage Again, Colorado Gives Foundation recommends 4%, comes back to the nonprofit each year, 4% of the fund value. I'm happy to answer a lot of questions about that as well. There are also, some people call them quasi-endowments or semi-endowments, and those can be, those are funds invested very similarly, but the distribution might vary a little bit. Maybe they'd say, maybe this year we need 10% or whatever, and a board governs that internally. The nice thing about what we do at Colorado Gives Foundation is we do all of the investments, we do all the distributions. You don't need you don't need an investment policy. You don't need to worry about, we take on fiduciary responsibilities, things like that. So a number of nonprofits do this in a lot of different ways. Some of them say, Colorado Gives Foundation and other community foundations, you are specifically designed to help nonprofits with their endowments. We want to host money with you. Others might hire a Fidelity or a Charles Schwab or a JP Morgan or something like that. That's also really great, but then they have to do some of their own governance, and they have to work more directly with an investment manager, and a lot of times their board needs a charter and their board needs investment policies and things like that. That's why most will lean towards a community foundation, but of course there are lots of different options. I actually worked for an organization that had a whole foundation, and they said, for a lot of reasons, we're going to put all of our permanent endowments with Colorado Gives Foundation, mainly because of the grant funding that we provide. But also, we are big enough to have our own foundation and to invest some money in semi-permanent endowments elsewhere. So for some of the bigger organizations, they might do that. For a lot of the others, that's why they use community foundations. I hope that answered the question. That was probably way too long.
No, but it was it was painting the picture of like different options and why you might choose a community foundation over, a Schwab or Fidelity. So that's great.
Yeah.
Joanna was asking about the 4% of the fund value that the nonprofit gets back each year. Could you just confirm, is that like guaranteed? Obviously, there's investments, so there's fluctuation, but is that 4% a guaranteed return?
Yeah, great question. It is. I'm going to learn my lesson from answering the last question and not make this a whole diatribe for 5-10 minutes. Instead, I'll just say, yes, how we and many organizations do this. This is best practice across the industry is 3, sometimes 5 year. We take a 3-year rolling average of the fund value and then make a 4% distribution. So it's not an average of what the fund made over 3 years. It's what it's valued at over 3 years. So let's say, and you can make fun of me because of how easy of math I'm going to use here. Let's say in 2022, your fund was worth $900,000. In 2023, it grew, so it's now worth $1 million. And in 2024, it grew some more, so it's worth $1.1 million on the last day of 2024. Well, I've conveniently picked those 3 numbers because the average of those 3 is $1 million. You add them all up, divided by 3, it's $1 million. And so 4% of $1 million would be $40,000 distribution. And guess what? The good news is the fund continues to grow. So then the next distribution would probably be something like $42,000. And the year after that would probably be something like $43,500, right? So the growth might fluctuate just a little bit, but because we use a 3-year rolling average of the fund value, then take 4% of that, it makes the distributions really, really pretty predictable. If the market goes down one year, the distribution actually probably won't even go down. It probably just won't go up a whole lot, right? Because again, the way we invest it and the way that we take averages, it makes it really predictable.
Awesome. You just answered a lot of questions that were in the chat. So I'm going to bring it back around with one last question related to the myths. So Natalie said that myth 2, dissuading donors, is her biggest concern, and they've experienced some aversion already. How can we frame an endowment to potential funders?
Man, really good question.
Yeah.
Man, I've been there. I remember I was working for an organization, and in 2017, there was just a lot of budget cuts. We were doing some work around immigration, and oh, it was really tough. And so we went back to some donors, and we were like, hey, um, this is a time we would love for you to prioritize us and think about stepping up for us. And I remember one saying, "You guys have $2 million in your endowment. Like, why would we do that?" Um, and I remember, though, explaining this to them, saying the purpose of this endowment is not as some safety net. What it is if we dip into that, we're limiting ourselves in the future. Instead, that is designed to ensure that our programs keep going on. And so I think that um, when donors understand that endowments aren't really designed to be like, well, in case something bad happens, we can go there. Instead, it's designed to the so instead of a rainy day fund, we want it to be an always sunny day fund. And I think the biggest thing for donors to realize is when we're able to create endowments, when it's the right time for us, and we'll talk about if it's the right time for you or not. It's the right time for us to create an endowment. We're trying to secure some funding both this year and in future years. We're not just saying, hey, we now have a great nest egg that we're sitting on. There still will be donors who maybe disagree with that. I'm going to talk a little bit later about board buy-in, and that might answer your question. Was it from Natalie? Natalie, that might answer your question a little bit more on board buy-in, because I think a lot of board members or a lot of donors think that nonprofits should operate a certain way, and they need to operate in a way in which they would never personally operate their own finances. They think we probably should always just end at net zero, right? Shouldn't be in the black, shouldn't be in the red, shouldn't have a big savings account. None of them operate their own finances that way, not a single one. So we'll talk a little bit more about maybe what a more balanced financial approach could look like. So maybe I'll better answer your question then. But also, I would say that the first part of answering your question is educating donors on really what endowments are not necessarily a safety net, but more investment in now and the future. But thank you for sharing that is a concern, because you're not the only one. Oh, benefits of endowment. I mentioned constant source of revenue, attractive to planned giving prospects. There is some interesting data on this that if people are going to put you in their will, sometimes a donor will be great and they'll say, hey, I would love to, for Jordan, for your nonprofit, I would love to, I've written you into our will, and my wife and I want to support you even when we're gone. If you want to leave the lights on a little extra the next few years and just kind of take it out of the gift that we made you, great. That's pretty rare. Most donors don't want you just to take their legacy, their gift, what they are leaving to you alongside what they're leaving to their children or to their loved ones, and just spend it all on operating in a year or two. Maybe some do, or some just don't care, and that's fantastic. I think that gives you some flexibility. But most of them are really, really attracted to the idea of, hey, I'm leaving you a legacy, and you have something that could carry that legacy on in perpetuity. So if I were to give to Jordan, I could have the Tim Zexer Scholarship Fund at Jordan's amazing nonprofit, whatever that would be. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask Jordan what her nonprofit would be later. But so I think donors are really attracted to, planned giving prospects are really attracted to the idea of perpetuity, that their legacy would live on, that maybe their kids would see the Tim Zexer Scholarship Fund and think, oh, that's really neat. I remember that about my dad. Or, hey, tell their kids about that. So I also mentioned attractiveness to foundations and grant makers. Colorado Gives Foundation has also said, we really like to see when an organization is making an impact now, but also has a vision to make an impact in the future. Of course, there are certainly grant makers who say, this is for a startup, this is for whatever. But for the most part, I would say that the consensus that I've heard from grant makers is that endowments wouldn't hurt your application. In fact, it would signal that you plan on doing this good work for a long time. Point four, continuity that transcends leadership. This is really interesting, and we'll talk more about this with board buy-in. But again, I was with one organization for 8 years, which in the nonprofit world, that's like an eternity, right? With some turnover that sometimes we see in the nonprofit world. But when I started the organization versus when I transitioned out, we had a new CEO, new CFO, new VPs, all sorts of things. Everyone but one or two board members was gone. Maybe one or two was on their last year of their third term, and so what an endowment can do for an organization is provide continuity that transcends the different groups that will be around that leadership table. And the idea is that hopefully that they will all have the resources to guide the organization forward, but also the guardrails so that they wouldn't completely deviate from the groundwork that other leaders have set before them. So I think it's a really, some board members are hesitant to lock money up, but also they're like, you know what, this gives future leaders here resources and guardrails to do the things that we want them to do. We mentioned increases value in perpetuity. So the way we invest it and the way we do distributions, the value will continue to go up year over year. And then lastly, which we'll talk about at the very end, it helps balance an organization's investment strategy. So a few really neat stories. Some of them are very simple, and some of them are very inspiring, of organizations that we work with. I won't use them by name, but that we work with that have set up endowments. One, Farms in the Valley. This was really neat. Jordan and I both got to work with this donor a little bit, who wanted to secure the future of her favorite program. And she said, you know, I want to do this while I'm actually alive. And so over the next 4 years, I'm going to slowly give some major gifts to you to set up an endowment. And so over the course of 4 years, she's working through giving $1 million to for an organization to slowly build their endowment so that it can spin off $40,000 in revenue to make sure that her favorite program lasts in perpetuity. And it's really neat. She was a sophisticated enough donor to realize that the best thing for them is to have continuity, not just a big influx in program in 1 year. Another one, we see this a few times, but honoring a great leader. So a scholarship foundation that we work with raised money to honor a former CEO, so that the fund would be named after this woman, and that that anytime the scholarship was awarded, that it was named after a former CEO, and it honored her great impact in this field. Another really not inspiring but super practical one, because it just shows good work year over year. An organization said, you know what, we really feel comfortable when we have, I'm going to make the number up, but 6 months of cash reserves, or maybe 3 months of cash reserves. We feel really comfortable at that level. But if we ever get beyond that, we want to start cascading that into an endowment so we can keep growing that, because what that does is that helps take the pressure off of our development team and off of our program team, and provide a good revenue stream year over year, but also it's a really good investment in our future. So some very different ways of a donor making a big gift, inspiring to kind of set up a different trajectory for the organization, honoring CEOs or even donors through named funds after them, and just as simple as, hey, we have extra cash reserves. We want to invest those in more meaningful ways. Okay, some roadblocks. Here's some roadblocks that we've heard, and we've already kind of heard a question about one of these, so I'm glad they're on here. A big one that we hear, Tim, how do we get the money to start an endowment? Colorado Gives Foundation, our minimum to start an endowment is $50,000. That's a big hurdle for a lot of organizations. So initial capital to start a fund, $50,000, spins off about $2,000 each year. Again, continues to grow, but spins off $2,000 each year. How do we get $50,000? That's a big roadblock, or more. apprehension of restricting resources. Like I said, some board members will say, if we lock this up forever, we can't really get to it. And what if there's a crisis? Well, there are ways that Colorado Gives Foundation works with organizations when there's a crisis. But I certainly get this idea that it might limit some creativity. Donor, board, leader misconceptions. We heard about a question about this earlier. A lot of times donors are a little apprehensive because they don't fully understand the longevity play in creating an endowment. Strategic financial prioritization. What I mean by this is simply nonprofits are doing a lot of great work. I'm working with one now who's saying, we don't know if we're going to make our capital campaign goals. So it's hard for us to think about anything else like an endowment. But still, looking at this in the long term, the same organization said, it actually might be good that if once we do hit our capital campaign goals, to go back to some of those donors and said, now that you've named this room in our new building, would you consider funding an endowment so that the program that happens in this room continues on in perpetuity? So we very much understand that there's some different strategies and different approaches that organizations take, and you have to prioritize. Unpredictable financial situations. Absolutely. Now, eventually, an endowment could help smooth these over by giving you predictable revenue year over year. But when the decision comes on, hey, we have $50,000 or $100,000, should we start an endowment, or do we need to build our cash reserves up a little bit more because we don't really know what the future holds? Absolutely. That's certainly something that a lot of organizations are looking at. Long-term vision and mission for the organization. I bring this up because there are absolutely some organizations who don't plan on being here in 10 or 20 years. And that could be for good reasons. They say, we want to solve this issue in 10 years. We have a short-term mission to, I'm making things up, to transform this park, this green space, and then once it's done, we can sunset out. So sometimes an organization doesn't have that vision to be around in 10, 20 years, and that is great. That's okay as well. And then endowment might not be the right choice for you. So this might be nice, and Jordan can kind of peek in the chat. I'm interested to kind of hear a little bit about the biggest roadblocks that you all are facing. I just threw a couple of them on here. A, is it that initial capital? There's no way I could find $50,000. I'm in the nonprofit world. Are you crazy? B, we're nervous about restricting resources. C is the lack of long-term vision. D, not sure where to start. E, other. I guess we've already kind of heard other of the donor of some. It might be off-putting to some donors, but I'd love to hear what you're thinking. I'm going to actually pop into the chat so I can see it myself.
And maybe this is a good time, Tim. Yeah, it's mixed, honestly. I think everybody is at a different stage, right?
B and C. I'm seeing A, B, and C. I'm seeing A and D. Yeah, a lot of good ones. Even down Kermit, we have an endowment. Yeah.
We had a question from Chrissy, that is related to this. And I think, a lot of folks are feeling this. So, she's concerned about the increasing needs and government chaos with funding. She likes the endowment as a concept, but she wants to be reassured that if there's a disaster or emergency, or the nonprofit has to consider shutting down, what actions does an organization like Colorado Gives Foundation help in those scenarios?
Absolutely. Yeah, what we are designed to do when we chat with organizations about starting endowments, there's a little bit of a checklist, and we'll kind of even go through this at the very end. It's we've boiled it down a little bit into a quiz, but we really kind of run through with organizations. Where are you? What do you feel like? How do you feel about where you are with your cash reserves and your year-over-year fiscal fluctuations, things like that? Because we absolutely do not want an organization to say, all right, this is it. This is our last $50,000. We're gonna open an account. Like, we would be the first to say, no, let's think about some other ways to help set you up in the short and midterm, and then we can help build your long-term future. So one, I think we do a little bit of proactive work to make sure that we're that you are in a good spot to do that. Think about it. Think about it this way. Um, if I were a financial advisor, which I am absolutely not, I am not qualified to give you any tax advice. But let's pretend that for a second that I am, because this is a fictional scenario. I'm a financial advisor. I'm talking with Jordan, and Jordan says, "Hey, I would like to open a retirement account." And I said, "That's a fantastic idea." And she said, "But I'm having trouble paying my rent." I would say, Jordan, I think you should focus on paying your rent. Also, if Jordan were to say, "Hey, Tim, you're my financial advisor. I have $1 million sitting in my checking account." I would say, "Oh, maybe we should think about opening a savings account, or maybe some mutual funds, or even how about a retirement, a 401k or an IRA or something like that." So I think one is we want to be very proactive in this with you, to say, where are you in this? And so you feel relatively comfortable that you can weather some storms, and some of the uncertainty that exists. That's one. Two, no one has a crystal ball. So if there are some things that exist, yes, we hold endowments for nonprofits, 130 different organizations. One or two a year might come to us and say, there is really, really a crisis going on. We need a little bit more access to our endowment. Again, this is not what the fund is designed for, but we know this happens. And so absolutely our board of directors can say, yep, we can try to approve an extraordinary distribution out of your fund in case of an emergency. I tell people that it's an option to explore that, but that's really not what the fund is designed for, and we want to make sure that we can prohibit that from happening, because then that's hampering future revenue for you in going forward if we have to do that. But we know that it does happen from time to time. So hope that sort of answered your question. I'm also happy to answer some of questions like that have more complex answers offline as well. I saw a great one about fee structure. I saw a great one about where our investments are. I love those. I could talk about those for an hour on its own, but I'm a little worried about time here, so we'll continue to go forward and see where we are at the very end, and then I can maybe even pull up some other things about our investments and fees and things like that.
I just want to clear my name that I'm good on rent, but also do not have $1 million in my bank account.
Perfect. So you're neither of the scenarios that where I think your financial advisor might raise his or her eyebrows. So how do we get started? Excuse me. Okay. Some tools to get started. If you answered A, oh my gosh, there's no way that we can find $50,000. I am going to orient us a little bit towards planned giving as a strategy there. If you answered some of the other ones, B, I might orient us to getting some buy-in from your board members. Then also, I will again mention that there's some great organizations. Colorado Gives Foundation, I believe, at the top of the list of this, that has some great endowment grants available. And then Jordan will also show us a little bit more about coloradogives.org on how to fundraise for endowments and other coloradogives.org topics. But some big answers, A, B in there. So let's talk a little bit about where we can find that capital, and also how to have these conversations with board members and donors and things like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about planned giving for a second. And what is planned giving? Is planned giving all those complex charitable remainder trusts and gift annuities, and a donor is going to leave me furniture and an old painting in their will? Sure. Yeah, I think it is some of those things, but more often than not, planned giving is just somebody writing you into their will to leave you either a fixed amount or a percentage of their overall estate. Planned giving, to me, is simply when a donor is very intentional about how he or she wants to make a gift, how he or she wants to make an impact with a gift now in the future. That's to me what planned giving is. So most often, it's simply writing your organization into their will. So why is this important, and why could we be harnessing planned giving to build endowments? Well, one, we already talked about donors want to give gifts that last. If you have an endowment, that's a little bit more likely to attract people writing you in their will, legacy gifts, planned giving donors. If you have an endowment, it's a little more attractive to them. If you get legacy gifts, that's the easiest way to build an endowment. So it's kind of cyclical. I don't want to say it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing on what comes first, but at the same time, they can kind of feed and they can grow each other. The easiest way to start an endowment is to receive a planned gift to do that. I'm going to show you a couple of stats. This one is from Brian Klontz. The average annual gift to an organization is $110. Just a donor just writes you a check. Better yet, they go on coloradogives.org and put you in there. $110 is the average gift. The average bequest gift, the average amount that they will leave to you in their will is $65,000. So I'm not even going to try the math on that, but that's a lot of annual gifts to make one bequest gift. So that's really neat. The other interesting thing, and this might not be my next slide, might be the one after that. Planned gifts actually, some people say I can't focus on planned giving, getting donors to write me in their will because I need their money now. Well, we'll see in a second that actually planned gifts don't detract from annual giving; they enhance it. I'll show you that in the next slide. But right now, planned giving is really important because in 2023, Giving USA, I'll pause, Giving USA every year comes out with their report. They come out in, I think, June-ish or so with their report on the state of philanthropy in the country. And they break it down into 4 categories: individuals, legacy, which they say individuals that have passed away, foundations, corporations. Bequests, individuals who have passed away, is the one that is steadily and most consistently rising. It's the only giving source of the 4 that I mentioned that exceeded inflation. It grew faster than inflation did in 2023. All the rest of them either didn't grow or they grew, but not at the pace of inflation. It has quadrupled in the last 40 years. People leaving money to you in their will. So I think we've been hearing about this great wealth transfer that's happening. Boomer generation and silent generation has accumulated a lot of assets and now are beginning to pass that on. Most of that will be passed on to their children and other loved ones, but a lot of it will go to charity. And so now is really a big time, according to Brian Klontz, according to a lot of people who study this in the industry, to be focusing on planned giving. Here's the slide that I promised you. This is from Russell James. He said, actually, if a donor is going to put you in their will, they will give more after they do that. So the average gift before they put you in their will, $4,000. You might say, Tim, you just showed us a stat that said the average annual gift is $110. That's just for everyone, every donor. But a donor who will eventually put you in their will, he or she on average will give $4,355. But the average size gift after they put you in their will jumps up to $7,699. I did the math on that. That's an 80% increase, 80% more that they will give you annually after they put you in their will. This is one that I could talk about for a while, but you might be saying, all right, great. Like I'm excited to start an endowment and I want to do that by trying to leverage some planned giving donors. How do I even begin? We'd be happy to connect and talk more with you about this. But here are just some 5 messaging tips when it comes to planned giving to remember. 1, utilize social norms. So there's an interesting study out of the UK that was done where they did different samples of donors. And the donors that received a story about people like them who wrote an organization in their will, those donors were 3 times more likely to do it themselves. So if you think, hey, I have some donors that might be interested in this, I would tell them a story about people similar to them that made that did something. So you could say, uh, I have some donors that maybe have a couple of kids and that are in their 60s, and they might be interested in this. So you could say, I heard about a family who divided their estate into three parts. So 40% went to one kid, 40 went to another kid, and they took that last 20% and they gave that to their favorite three nonprofits. I also heard a story about about when one of a donor's father passed away. They started an endowed scholarship in his name because he had always done a lot of work around education, whatever it is. Hopefully you have some stories. If you don't, that's okay. Ask your colleagues. Ask us. We're happy to share some stories, and you could say, we would love to recreate that here at our nonprofit. We don't have anything like that right now, but we know that this has been really meaningful to other donors. So it'd be great if you already have some stories. If you don't, that's okay. You can be authentic and still say, I've heard some other organizations have done this, and this might be something that you would explore. That's one. Two, back to Dr. Russell James. He says words that work. You can Google words that work Russell James and watch a 10-minute video, watch an hour video, read through reports. There are certain things that he says are much easier for donors to digest. He said, Tim, don't ever use your estate plan and bequest and things like that. I'm using that with you, but with donors, they'll say, what is that? I don't have an estate. That sounds like an English countryside manor or something. I have a house. I don't even own the whole thing. The bank owns half of it. So the estate might not work, but you could say, hey, would you consider writing us into your will? Would you consider a gift that makes an impact even after you're gone? So Russell James has a lot of words that resonate with donors better than others. Number three, keep it simple. A lot of people say we can't do planned giving because I don't know what a charitable gift annuity is. I don't know what a charitable remainder trust is. I would say if you can accept a check in the mail, then you can do planned giving. 90% of planned gifts will arrive to you as a check in the mail, either because someone writes you in their will, and when their estate gets settled, they'll send you a check, or they will write you as the beneficiary of an insurance policy, which again, they will send you a check. So keep it simple. 90% of gifts will arrive as a check. So if you can take that, you can do planned giving. That leads me to number four. The biggest thing for donors in the space of planned giving is to let them know that you are interested and honored to be added in their will. I've heard a lot of just very sad stories about donors who love an organization, didn't write them in their will, and wrote a big, the Red Cross or the Salvation Army. I hope there's people from the Red Cross and Salvation Army on here. Thank you. You do great work. But they write big organizations in their will because that's the only ones that they think can take their gift. So take up some shelf space in their mind. You can put it in your email signature. We would love for you to consider putting us in your will. You can mention it at your next event. You can mention it at your board meeting. So take up shelf space in their mind just so they know that they can do it because you can accept a check. So that means that they can do it. And then the last one we talked about a lot, if you want to link the idea of endowments with them, that helps a lot of people who are interested in planned giving. Jordan, how are we doing on time?
We're doing good, but we should motor through the next so we can get to some of these
You
great
got it.
questions. And I want to say there's so many great questions. Just want to
Great.
acknowledge that. We'll go through the chat afterward and make sure everything's answered directly if we don't get to it today. So thank you all.
Great. I'll kind of motor through this one here. So that's a little bit about planned giving. That was by far the most robust part. I just have one slide or so on board buy-in talking points. So I think a lot of our board members, they care deeply about our organizations. They want it to succeed now. And I think a lot of them do have the sophistication to think about, we want it to succeed in the future as well. They care about you. At least I certainly hope they do. I almost every board member I've ever met is in it for the right reasons. So they're a great group of people that just, I think, want to consider your success both now and in the future. So again, when they're thinking about how to allocate resources, or maybe this is your finance team or your CEO thinking about how to allocate resources. Some of it is maybe program growth. There's a lot of pros to investing money into program growth now. Some of the times they're thinking about cash reserves. Some of the times they're thinking about growing endowments. This is just a quick slide to orient you. Here's the not so trick question of this. If I say, which one should you prioritize? This is not a trick question. You should prioritize the things that you really think are important to you now, but also the healthiest organizations are the ones that will be able to balance all three. And like we said with the financial example with Jordan earlier, it might take time to grow cash reserves, and then it might take time to grow an endowment, and that's okay. Just like when I was straight out of college, I don't think I had cash reserves. I certainly didn't have a 401k, but that takes time to do those things. And so, but helping board members understand that you as a nonprofit need to approach your finances the same way that they approach their own personal finances, and not just end every year at net zero. That might be helpful for them to understand as they grasp the idea of endowments, building appropriate cash reserves, and investing in programs. I'll also circle that back to the question earlier on, hey, I have a donor that just doesn't believe that we need the money if we have an endowment. I still need a paycheck as well, even though I have a 401k. I think we all can see that this helps more balance out our investments. We already mentioned some of this. Again, the last tip, find an organization. Community foundations are really great at this, especially Color Gives Foundation, that will help you get on the road to endowments by adding some grant funding, because there are some community foundations that are out there that will do that. Again, what we do is a 10% matching grant. So an organization says, we want to start an endowment from $50,000. We'll say, congratulations, it's now $55,000. You say $1 million. Congratulations, it's now $1.1 million. I'll power through this actually. I know might be some questions about this. I know there's some other questions as well. So then, just real quick, here are some questions that I would ask. You could ask yourself. This is not a quiz on how well you listened. You might be tuned in, or you might be writing your next donor letter. Either way, it's okay. But quiz just to ask yourself, does your organization think you're going to be around? Do you have a vision to be in existence in 20 years from now? That's a question to ask yourself if you're wondering if an endowment is right for you. If you think yes, then maybe so. 2, how predictable is your financial outcome? Do you vary wildly from year to year? I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but do you say some years, man, we're 10% in the black, and other years we're 20% in the red? Or say, yeah, like I said, I actually was a fundraiser for a couple of local nonprofits for 11 years. I honestly think that, like, if we ended in the black 4 of those 11 years, that would be great. So I get it. I get how this sometimes works. But if you're like, man, we can't pay salaries every once in a while, that's one thing. But if no, sometimes it's tight, sometimes it's not. So how does it vary wildly, or are you relatively stable year over year? This is a leading question. I'll be the first to admit it. But are you hoping to add tools to harness the great wealth transfer and attract more planned gifts? And honestly, you might be saying, that's not really who our donors are. Or you might be saying, yeah, I have a lot of donors who are in the stage of life where they are considering what their legacy is. And so an endowment could be a really great option for them to make that legacy last. Do you have the immediate capital or a prospective donor that could seed a $50,000 investment? Do you feel relatively comfortable with your cash reserves? Again, we don't want anyone to be investing their last $50,000. We want you to be healthy. We want you to be in operation this year, next year, and 20 years from now. And one more, do you possess sophisticated board members and donors that might be attracted and understand a long-term vision. There's no magic number if you said yes to 3 of these, or if you said yes to all 6. I mean, if you said no to all of them, then it might not be your time. But all of these are things that we can navigate. And I would just say, based on that, if you feel like, yeah, I have said yes to a number of these, even if it's not all of them, there's some next steps for creating endowments, especially with Colorado Gives Foundation. I'd love to connect with you. While Jordan talks, I'm going to drop a little scheduling tool into the chat. So if you want to schedule time with me to have a 30-minute conversation, especially if we don't get to some of these questions, I'm happy to do that. But it's a pretty straightforward process to establish endowments. The big thing is we want to make sure it aligns with your priorities and your strategic planning and vision, and that you have the right buy-in. I'll turn it back over to Jordan and try to answer some questions in the chat.
Awesome. And Tim, I'm going to share my screen.
You got
so
it.
Go ahead and.
I'm going to hit stop share.
Awesome. All right, guys. So, wow, so much to think about in terms of endowments. And truly, I learned something new every time I work with Tim or we're talking to nonprofits about how they want to really secure their future. So thank you, Tim. This has been great content. I'm jumping in here at the end just to flash some examples to you of how people are fundraising for endowments through digital fundraising. So I think the big question is, why is digital fundraising important? Why does it matter? We're talking about planned giving. We're talking about long-term investments. Where does digital fundraising kind of play in that world? So I think first ask yourself, how much time is your nonprofit spending fundraising? Some experts say that nonprofits should dedicate a significant portion of their time to fundraising. So at least 50% from an executive director or person with a full-time position. And so, I think that sounds like a lot, especially if you're, a streamlined and lean nonprofit operating with what you've got. So I'm curious here, how much time does your nonprofit spend fundraising? Would you say it's about 50% or one dedicated person? Would you say it's more like 30% or a part-time staff member? Or is it mostly, which I talk to a lot of folks that this is the case, it's whatever time we have left over after executing programs and doing great work in the community. So just want to get a feel for, what folks are experiencing. Great. A's, C's, love to see. Yeah, a big mix. So we've got a great group of folks here that are all at different levels of really putting the pedal to the floor in their fundraising, moving away potentially from grant reliance and moving into new revenue streams. And that's why I think digital fundraising is so important for you guys to consider as one piece of the pie in your fundraising strategy. And it's important because it offers greater reach to your audience, to your supporters, and those to be in the future. It's accessibility. People are online, meet folks where they are at, where they spend their time. It's cost effective. Digital fundraising by nature is more cost effective than more traditional forms of fundraising. And there's just lots more engagement opportunities. I can engage somewhere with my favorite nonprofits on Instagram and then head to Facebook and see that they are also doing a fundraiser on Colorado Gives. I can go to their website and experience all their different programs and be funneled into giving. So that should all work in a streamlined way, and it's going to be more cost effective and allow more people to get at your message and mission and help support you. With that, it's going to streamline your processes, which is sometimes, the hard part. There's a transition year where you adopt the technology and you have to transition, but that is going to make you a more efficient nonprofit with longevity into the future. And then, of course, you're going to build stronger relationships with donors if there's more accessibility to what you're doing and the engagement that you're putting out there. So I'll step off my digital fundraising soapbox now, but I just really think that if it's kind of a side thought for any of your fundraising efforts that are already planned, your events, your golf tournaments, your galas, your volunteer events, your Colfax Marathon fundraising. You can put a digital fundraising piece into that and have it be more successful. All right. So Colorado Gives, just so everybody knows, is a free year-round fundraising site for all Colorado nonprofits. So of course, everybody knows us for Colorado Gives Day, which we love, the statewide movement and giving event that's online. This year, that's November 1st through December 9th, 2025. But guess what? You can use this site all year round and it's free. So whether it's your main fundraising site that you funnel all your donations through, or you pop in and out to leverage matching grants or peer-to-peer fundraising from time to time. There's nearly 5,000 nonprofits using Colorado Gives, and many of them are fundraising for endowments. So this is just one image, one example from Yampa Valley Community Foundation. They're raising funds for South Route Education Endowment. So they created a fundraiser page, and look how they're doing great. They're already at $31,000. So there's ways, of course, in addition to the major donor conversations you're having, there's ways to invite other supporters to give back and give to your endowment. Just a quick check, because it's our first webinar of the season. There is a ton of activity going on Colorado Gives, meaning people are donating, people are peer-to-peer fundraising, setting up matching grants all year long. So in 2024, we saw $77 million donated through the Colorado Gives platform. And that's not us doing that, that's all of you. So give yourselves a round of applause. And we know that and see already that that's continuing steady growth in 2025. And then, of course, for Colorado Gives Day last year, we saw 54.8 million donated to your nonprofits throughout that time period. So exciting numbers, and really, we are bucking some of the national trends on our coloradogives.org fundraising platform. So join us, have a call with me, and let's talk about what digital fundraising means for your endowments and other stuff you have planned. And last thing I'll say here, I want to make sure you have these 3 resources available to you. They're linked here, and they're also on the nonprofit resources page. So we've redone the nonprofit resources page, and it has a lot of great resources for you to take advantage of. The first one that I want to make sure you're taking action on is to sign up for Catch a Fire. Catch a Fire connects you, your nonprofit, to expert consultants. They're doing work pro bono for you, whether it's creating a new website, marketing material updates, translations, setting up your new CRM. Catch a Fire is a program that we are paying for, the Colorado Gives Foundation, on behalf of all nonprofits. And then the last thing I'll encourage you to do is make sure if you have any questions, email our support team. They're Monday through Friday, or you can set up a call with me to talk through how to leverage Colorado Gives. So with that, I just really want to thank you guys, turn it back over to Tim, and see if there's any questions or themes, Tim, that you might want to bring up to answer as we close out today.
Wow, really good. I've been trying to go through and type some answers, and it really makes me wish I had paid more attention in high school typing class, but because I could have gotten a lot more answers in. But no, this is fantastic. So there's some answers in the chat there. There's some questions on where we can find the history of Colorado Gives investment returns. There's a couple of good investment questions. I'm happy to answer that as well on how we do that and why we recommend that 4%. I'm looking through here to see other ones. How long after you start an endowment would you receive distributions? Would it take 3 years? That's a really great question. Also because it's a quick one for me to answer. No, absolutely not. There are organizations who have worked really hard to say we want to start an endowment to get distributions as quickly as possible. So as long as we have the endowment started before the end of the year, before the end of a calendar year, we can make distributions that following August is what we usually do. So, and even though I talked about a 3-year rolling average, let's say you start an endowment for $1 million, we're not going to say it's 0 0 and $1 million and average it out to 333,000. No. We'll just say it's $1 million, and then after 2 years we'll take a 2-year history. Then 3 years we'll take a 3-year history. After 4 years we'll start chopping off that last year. So distributions are made in August based on what the fund value is on the last business day in December. Are there fees? There's a couple of fee questions, and absolutely, we are very, very transparent with our fees. There are 4 different kinds of fees because there's a lot of investing going on. We just take care of 2 of them. We don't pass them along to any of our partners. The 2 types of fees that do get passed along. One is an administrative fee that slides. That's 1% admin fee. On the first $1 million, it slides down to 0.75 between $1 and $2 million, and then over 2, it slides down to 0.5%. So that's for admin to do all the things that we talked about. So to have an investment policy, to do the distributions. There's free coaching and consulting that we do with you to help you raise money for your endowments. And then, but if you really think about it, that grant funding that we offer right up at front, the 10% matching grant, that's what really sets us apart. That wipes out fees, gives you pretty much free investing for a decade or so. So most people find it's a pretty good deal that other big firms, maybe like the Fidelities and Charles Schwab's, I don't think that they're giving you free investing for a decade. The other fee that I mentioned is an investment management fee. We report, a lot of organizations do this, we do this too. We report net of that fee. So when you see your returns, it's always net of the investment management fee. Again, just to compare, if you had an awesome board member who said, I'll do all the investing for you for free, there's still that investment management fee that's just kind of hidden because companies report net of that. For a lot of organizations, it's about 0.6, 0.7, maybe even higher. Because of our relationship, we're a big foundation. We also have a relationship with Morgan Stanley. Our investment management fee is at 0.29%. Is very, very small. So the most you'd ever pay in fees is 1.29%. We're very transparent with all of those because we have heard from a lot of people that they're frustrated that others are not as transparent. So that's what we like to do. So there's some fee questions in there. I'm happy to share. Try to look through any other questions that I see. Or give us an idea how much is given back each year. I think maybe I answered this part, but yeah, like I said, we recommend a 4% distribution. I'll talk a little bit about our investments now in 1 minute. We have a portfolio called our long-term portfolio that's specifically tailored for endowments. We're a foundation ourselves. Colorado Gifts Foundation operates in a very similar way, where we do all of our programs, all of our services, all of our staff expenses, everything like that, all comes from our investments as well. So we are designed to invest our money just like you would invest money in endowments. So what we shoot for in our long-term portfolio is to CPI, that's just a fancy word, consumer price index. I'm going to oversimplify by saying we want to keep up with inflation plus 5% is what we try to do. So that's why we recommend a 4% distribution, because that means your fund is keeping up with inflation. Any of the fees that come back to us, and your fund still continues to grow. So thank you. Great questions with that. If you're considering endowments, ask a bunch of people what their fees are, and be like, and are there any other hidden ones? So ask around. We very much want you to know all the ins and outs of this. Any other? Isn't it against IRS laws to take directed donations? Wouldn't it be a directed donation if? Oh, about the church flowers. I have no idea. That's a really great question. I will say for the second time, I am no way qualified to give tax advice. So if a question has IRS in it, I usually avoid it. But I will say that absolutely there are times where donors and nonprofits work together to say, I want I want to create a fund that honors this person or is for a particular program. I don't know of any IRS laws that would prohibit that. Um, so, but the flower one, that actually, who knows? That could be that could be. I think I answered what's a quasi endowment, but I'll answer that again. So some organizations say we're just not ready to fully restrict funds. We work with organizations like that as well, where they say um, we have something called a long-term designated fund, where an organization could open up funding with us. We really only offer this to people who also have a permanent endowment with us, but they could say, we want to grow money. We want to invest it so it's invested in the same portfolio. It's getting good exposure to the markets. But we want to grow money over time. And then maybe we would want to take more than 4% out. We want to take 10% or 25%, or we want to take the whole thing out because we want to maybe are working towards a capital campaign or a big new program or something like that. That's kind of a quasi endowment. So it can be grown over time. Maybe sometimes you take 4%, but then you say, we need a bigger chunk. We have a fund that does that as well. So the only two differences between that and a permanent endowment: one, you have a little bit more flexibility of taking more than 4% out. Two, because of that, it doesn't qualify for our matching grants. Not that any nonprofit would do this, but what a great way to make $100,000 than by investing $1 million into a quasi endowment. We give you a match and then you take it out the next day. Not that any of you would do that, but quasi endowments are really great as well. We offer those to people who have endowments or organizations that have a permanent endowment with us. But that also might answer a question of if your board is a little apprehensive to set up, have the vision to set this up in perpetuity. So.
Can we round it out with one more question that I saw? And then again, these are some great and detailed questions in the chat. We will follow up with folks directly, and you're encouraged to schedule some time with Tim to talk through any additional details. So I saw one question that I really, really liked. A nonprofit said that they had sent out a mailing, and one of the check boxes that donors could fill out was that they were interested in planned giving. And so they got some responses and they're asking, okay, what do we do now? And so I wanted to kind of pose that to you, Tim. What is your suggestion for nonprofits that may have a couple leads or ideas of leads? What do you think next steps would be? My suggestion was learn the conversation, get your questions answered by Tim, and then have a one-on-one meeting with these folks. But have you seen nonprofits approach kind of that initial cultivation in different ways?
Really good question. I think the next steps forward, go back to some of those 6 questions that we asked in that quiz. Is how do you feel about your cash reserves? How do you feel about your vision? Do you have donors that you think would really want to take it, that could be good to invite to be planned giving, to write you in their will? And if you answered yes to a few of those, it might be worth having a follow-up conversation. Certainly, you can look at more of the pieces of what we do, but I'd be happy to connect with you. And that reminds me, I promised I would drop my own link in here, which I'm going to do now, real quick. If you do want to schedule time with me, happy to do that. So ask yourself those questions. Talk a little bit about this with your own leadership team to say, is this something that we really works with where we are as an organization? If the answer is, wow, we really need to invest a lot into our programs right now, or wow, we're really uncertain about the time. We really don't know about the uncertainties of what's going on in the nonprofit world. We get it. We want this to be on your time, not on ours or not on anyone else's time. But we'd be happy to connect with you and answer more questions about to see if it's the right time with you. So to answer your question, Jordan, which I'm really good at taking an easy answer and making it long, I would say have the internal conversations around those 6 questions that we asked you. Reach back out to us, and we could see how we can help.
Yeah. You see in this last question from Rebecca here. Rebecca says, what are the steps for a new nonprofit to get enough money to form an endowment? we are nowhere close to having those finances. And I think you covered this a little bit in kind of, when are you ready? Are you out of college and no money, or are you prepared to invest in a 401k?
Yeah, great question. And I think that's the one that a lot of us are thinking about. But I also wouldn't say that that this is like something that you're not going to be able to entertain for 20 years. This is why I think that we dedicated a big portion of this to planned giving, because if you can cast the right vision with the right donor, maybe they'll leave you in their will. But maybe like that one story I shared about the endowment, the farm in the valley in the San Luis Valley, was that the donor said, I'm not going to wait till I'm gone. I love this and I love you all and I want this to be sustainable. So I think for you, for a newer nonprofit, of course, planned giving would probably be the easiest way to get there. But also, if you have this as a part of your long-term vision and are willing to cast that to some major donors, that they might be excited to get behind it during their lifetime as well.
I think that's great. And I'll share one last just tidbit about the farm in the valley. Um, Very proactive donor, obviously had a vision for how she wanted her, funds to be used. But sometimes you have to be the person having that question or checking in with those donors, so that they can raise their hand and say, oh, my father just passed away, or I think there was, a
Yeah.
movement with this particular donor and some of her estate that she was able to start actively investing in an endowment and kind of paint the vision for the future. So just want to encourage you guys to start having the conversations with folks. And it can be as common as, what's going on in your life? What do you see for supporting our nonprofit in the future? So I think there's nothing better than in-person meeting too, or,
Look,
face-to-face meeting, I should say.
I guess maybe the last thing I'll say, too, echoing on that, Jordan, is I already believe that what you all are doing, what we all are doing in fundraising for nonprofits, you are giving your donors give you gifts, but you're giving your donors a gift. You're giving them the gift that they can infuse some extra purpose into their lives and be a part of something bigger than just us as individuals. And endowments do the same thing, just for longer. So you're giving them a really big gift to honor a loved one, to have their gift last longer than be around longer than any of us will. So if you view what you do as giving your donors a gift, this is just a way to do that and have it last longer.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for today and for your time spent in this great discussion. As we said, slide deck and the recording will be sent out. Give us a day or so to do that, just to turn it all around. And we encourage you through our scheduling links to chat with us, because that's where this all starts. So thank you so much, and everybody have a great day and a great week.